Hi, welcome to Chat Communications Happenings and Trends. So today I wanted to speak about a particular case of Alice Marie Johnson and also kind of the criminal justice system as it exists in the United States more broadly. So first, let me just give you some information regarding the criminal justice system here. And unfortunately, I have to try to do something cool, hopefully. So let's see. And I'll play this entire thing. Okay, so per capita, the US contains the largest prison population in the world with a total of 2.3 million people in prison. And as you can see here by the prison, at this chart, from this chart by the Prison Policy Initiative, the federal prison houses about 225,000 inmates, while the state houses 1.3 million inmates. And locally, jails house 615,000 inmates, of which 465,000 are awaiting trial and have not yet been convicted. So 1/5 of these incarcerations are about, or 20%, are incarcerated for drug-related offenses, which is totaling approximately 455,690 inmates. Of, again, the 2.3 million inmates, about 1.39 million, or 60%, are incarcerated for non-violent offenses, which is just absolutely atrocious. And this is actually going to lead us into the case of Alice Marie Johnson. And my mouse isn't working. Okay. There it goes. All right. So if you don't know who she is, Alice Marie Johnson was convicted of a crime pertaining to drug. It was a drug offense in which she was convicted of actually being a dealer. She was convicted of being a drug dealer. And this, and according to Alice Marie Johnson, this was because she, basically how she got involved in this industry was because she lost her job and simultaneously ended up getting divorced, lost custody of her child. And so she was very desperate. And so she started dealing cocaine specifically. And as such, she was caught. She was caught along with a few other people, and 10 of her co-conspirators, in exchange for lighter sentences, decided to testify against Alice Marie Johnson. And this ended up giving her a life sentence in prison, even though this was her first time in trouble with the law, period, and her first time convicted of any crime. And so she, along with a lot of other people, there was an inmate that actually went to prison with Alice Marie Johnson. She, not for the same thing, but was housed in the same facility, and basically saw her case, ended up getting released at some point, and then started a nonprofit to help get inmates released on kind of nonviolent, for the fact that they did nonviolent offenses. And so she took up Alice Marie's case, petitioned it to Barack Obama, and Barack Obama did not grant Alice Marie Johnson clemency. However, there was a report by Mike that did a wonderful job in reporting about this particular case. And this happened to come across Kim Kardashian's timeline on Twitter. And she ended up reading the article and tweeted it out about how unfair this was, that this person was in prison for the rest of her life for a non-violent offense. As such, she ended up pretty much, taking this as one of her main causes that she wanted to focus on. And I'm sure everybody remembers that Kim Kardashian went and visited the president pretty recently. It was a big brouhaha, big to-do, and a lot of people were a bit confused. I had been following Alice Marie Johnson's case in relation to Kim Kardashian, so I knew that the intent was to bring up the case of Alice Marie Johnson to the president. And that's exactly what Kim Kardashian has done. And as such, Donald Trump, a few days ago, granted Alice clemency, but she had been serving so far something of like 21 years in prison. And so basically, clemency is a reduction in the sentence and saying, you have served a certain amount of time, that's sufficient, you are now released. And she was released either yesterday or today. And so that's kind of where we are in the United States is, I guess, like, what do we do when we have cases like Alice Marie Johnson's and they're basically thrown away to rot in prison for the rest of their lives, which is crazy to me. And it's horrible. And again, this was her first offense. And because of the fact that our drug laws are so strict here, and regardless of it being her first offense, it was because of the amount that she had on her person that she automatically received a life sentence. So there was no debate about it. There was no, discussion that she should receive less, even though it was her first offense. And this is where we are. We not only do we have the largest prison population in the world per capita, this disproportionately affects minorities, specifically for Black Americans. They make up 40% of the prison population, but yet only 13% of the general population. The same with Native Americans. Now, they are, even though they only represent 1% of the American population, they represent 2% of the prison population. So you can see how kind of this seems to be a very targeted effort towards minorities, where white Americans are not incarcerated at these same rates. Now, all of these numbers do not include the people that are still involved in the criminal justice system in some way through probation, or something along those lines. Those are an additional few millions of people in the probationary system. And we have a very draconian probation system as it stands, especially if you've been convicted of a federal crime, because then you have a difficult time finding employment, of course, because you have, kind of a hit on your federal background check. And then you can't get a job, but that's part of the conditions of probation, is that you have to be employed. So it becomes very complicated. And so people find themselves back in the system in some manner. So I just wanted to see, or I guess, do we have anybody online right now? I don't think we do. Let's see.
But there's a couple of people.
We don't have a lot of people online right now, but because I like to kind of read comments to see how people feel or how people want to take this in. Now, I know that some people are going to argue, sorry, it just flicked to the screen did, but I know that some people are going to argue, well, this isn't really an injustice against minorities specifically. They are just more criminally inclined. But then they forget about the history the United States have in incarceration rates, particularly pertaining to minorities, particularly pertaining to African Americans. Now, incarceration was a means to basically get slave labor for people that whites particularly thought should be enslaved to begin with. And so they started criminalizing just so mundane behaviors, like looking at a white woman the wrong way. They would start criminalizing Black people and then throwing them in prison and locking away and throwing away the key. And so we have a history of utilizing imprisonment specifically for slave labor against minorities. And when that is part of the collective consciousness, which literally these civil rights laws did not really go into effect until the 1960s. So there was a long time period that not only did we have an entire racial group enslaved in the United States, but they went through Jim Crow laws, Reconstruction, and all these things that basically did penalize specific behaviors towards a particular racial group. And this is no better reflected than in our criminal justice system and our laws and our own police that target minorities. Because if you look at marijuana, for example, Blacks are more likely to go to prison for marijuana possession compared to their white counterparts for the same exact crime and the same exact amount of marijuana. So we can see that there is a racial discrepancy, even in such a little instance as marijuana, which I know it's technically not a little instance because marijuana is not legal on a federal level in the United States. In fact, there's still about 20, I want to say 2 states that still have marijuana as 100% illegal, even in the medical sense. And so that aside, we have a huge problem in the United States targeting racial groups. And as you can see, Alice Marie Johnson is a Black woman that had very little resources, was obviously very poor. That's why she ended up dealing cocaine in the first place, was to basically get fast money so that she can pay her bills, because she was in almost, to the point of destitution is where she was at. And she had no resources. Let's see. So Aaron A makes a comment here that says drug crimes are inherently racist, and the only reason they're even in public discussion right now is because white people are being affected. And I'm not sure if white people are affected to the same rates, but now that our private prison industry has really gone amok to some extent, a little bit maybe more so than I guess they were maybe about 10 years ago. White people may be more affected, or maybe they're just trying to imprison more Black folks, more Black and brown people as well. But yeah, it may be something along those lines that is the case.
I think the case that more white people are affected now is because the drug of choice is switching over to narcotics, to the opioids, and that we talked about that with Scott, that is more moving away from the inner cities and out to the outskirts of it. So maybe that's why they are a little bit more affected with it. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be the case. Now, I don't know to what extent they're being criminalized for it versus, if it's more, I know it is affecting death rates for sure. But are they being criminalized more for dealing and all these other instances? Or because we know where we're getting the opioids are not necessarily from dealers, right? They're from pharmacies and big pharma. And so they're the dealers in this case, and they never get penalized for poisoning people. And this is a poison. Opioids is a poison for some people that could be using another drug like marijuana to help modulate some of the pain that they may be feeling. But instead, they have no other choice but to go to an opioid, and then a stronger opioid, and then to an more illicit substance like heroin. So it's possible that they are being more criminalized. But I wish I'd had the numbers specifically on that, as far as like how opioids has affected the prison population and the racial breakdown of imprisonment. But I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it was just a theory. It was just a theory on my part. So
no, I think you're right. I think that's definitely a good reason, because it is affecting both everybody in society, specifically white America. But I don't know if the drug rates are changed or if it's their drug of choice that has changed, because again, Blacks have gotten targeted more frequently. But now is it becoming to the point where, oh, maybe we should start targeting white America because we're starting to see white people die from this particular drug? I'm not sure.
Well, it's I'm sure.
But I do think that there is.
I'm sure on privatization they don't care about your color. So if they can get money for imprisoning a white person too now, then I mean, of course they'd rather go after the people of color. But I mean, hey, it's more money for them. So what do they care?
Here's my theory as to why they would care, is because white America typically has more money and resources to fight back against some sort of injustice and some sort of system. And so once white America starts being targeted by particularly the private prison population, industry, instead of being a little bit of more covert operation, it would be more overt towards white folks that would then have the resource to fight that industry. And that's why they have traditionally targeted Black and brown Americans, because again, the private prison population industry does benefit from having more people imprisoned. In fact, I think sometimes they have a contract with these states, localities, and the federal and federal justice system that they have to have their beds completely filled. And that's at least what I learned in my criminology class, but that was, back in 2000, early 2000s, let's say. So I'm not sure if that's the case now, that they have to be at maximum capacity to operate. And that's written in the contracts of some of these private prison industries, like between them and the state and whomever they're dealing with. I'm not sure if that's the case with every contract either. So some of them may say, ideally, this is how much it's going to cost if we're at maximum capacity, but we don't necessarily have to be at maximum capacity to operate. And when they say like we have to be at this capacity to operate, also right under that clause, it basically spells out what it means. And that means that they will break their contract with whomever if their beds are not completely 100% full. And so localities have an incentive to make sure those beds are full. And this is the corruption of the private prison industry, because at some point we're all going to be involved if we don't get a handle on it, right? I don't think anything regarding human life and the criminal justice system, if you are truly interested in justice, should be privatized. I mean, if you're talking about they have to basically have all these beds filled, well, a great way to do that is to make sure you target poor people that can't get out of prison and make bail, or can't get out of jail. So you have a judge, your trial set for this date, and you haven't been convicted of any crime, but you're going to sit and rot in jail anyways, because you can't afford to make bail. So that's a great way to make sure that those beds stay filled. Now, that in our justice system, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. So are you supposed to be locked up specifically for a non-violent offense? Again, 60% of those that are incarcerated are there on non-violent offenses, and be awaiting trial and be there for like having some marijuana on you, but you can't make bail because you can't afford it. It's one of those things that makes me so upset with the United States, because we could be doing better regarding this, but we have to incarcerate everybody because it's profitable. And the more, the better. And again, these people that own the shareholders, the people that own some stock into these companies, they have to basically see that they've made a profit. And you have to increase profits, right? And so the best way to do that is to imprison more people. That's what it comes down to. So Without Remorse 12 remarks that whites have health insurance and thus are more likely to get opioid prescriptions. The problem with the drug war is it will undermine any attempt to drug addiction as a health issue. You're right. And Without Remorse, I would argue that currently drug addiction isn't considered a health issue because it's already so heavily criminalized in the United States. Now, if we treated it as a health issue, would it remain more criminalized among those without health insurance? I don't know. I would hope that if we treat it more as a problem with the health part of this, because it is addiction, we don't criminalize sex addictions. People would go and get treatment for that, or gambling addictions. necessarily. People would go get treatment for that. So drug is the only addiction in which we have criminalized so heavily that you get locked away for life in some cases for being involved in the drug trade or the drug industry or being addicted to the drugs. And it's a failure of America. And we should be ashamed of ourselves. And I know that we're not all responsible. Don't get me wrong. I recognize that. But I think a society with 2.3 million people in prison, 60% of whom are African American, and again, 60% of whom are incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. That speaks volumes about who we are currently as a society, and that's not a pretty look. I'll be honest.
No.
Bluebell 51 remarks that one small piece of good news on the jail front. Todd Ederkin, I can't pronounce that last name. The sheriff who was starving inmates to steal the food funds went down in a flaming pile of poo in the last election. I did hear about that, and I'm still don't know how to pronounce his name. But so what this particular sheriff was doing was he was stealing funds for prisoners in his locality, and he's in Alabama somewhere. He was stealing the funds that were specifically allocated for food and basically depositing those funds into his own bank accounts. And he was, I guess, kind of in return, or to be cheap, was buying food that literally was labeled not safe for human consumption and giving that food to inmates. And it was, and AI, which is one of the Alabama news agencies in Alabama, obviously, reported on this, that he happened to have a $750,000 house, a beach home. And they're like, where'd you get this money? And so they did an investigation and found that it was money that he had stolen from the inmates' food funds. And there was a check written at some point to like someone that was mowing his grass that said food funds on it. And he paid the person that was mowing his grass with those food funds. And apparently it's not illegal for him to have done this. In fact, there's the idea that because this is on the books in so many states around the country, and I think this was on the books since the Great Depression. I don't know why, but it has been on the books since then. And it basically stated that a sheriff can use whatever funds, and that these funds do not have to be reported as additional income. And these funds can be taken from the inmates, whatever, like to house, to food, and to feed them, basically, if it's additional funds. So it's like extra income that they don't have to report, that can go to sheriffs. Now he was removed from office and replaced by another Republican. And as far as I know, that law is still on the books there, and he will not face any penalization regarding law penalization because it wasn't illegal for him to do. And that's just, to me, just goes, and it's very symbolic of the corruption of our criminal justice system too. And it's emblematic of that instance of you thinking that your inmates are so below you and so beneath you and nobody gives a shit about them, that you can steal the money that was supposed to be allocated for their food and use it for your own personal gain. That is deplorable in every sense of the fucking word.
I'm going to comment, because then they scream at us when we say that they use prison labor like slave labor, and they're going to treat prisoners not give them enough food to eat. You know, they make them do labor. They don't make the money. They're supposed to be in there rehabilitating. They're supposed to be paying a sentence to society and hopefully getting better. You know, I mean, this is not all of them, but what you said, like 60% are non-violent offenders in prison. Most of these people, they were drug addicts and they get put in prison for like nothing, and then we get the centrists coming down on us for trying to even fight for these people. I don't get how people don't understand that this could happen to anyone. You can make one mistake in your life, you not have the money to get out of it, and you could be paying for that for the rest of your life, and it could be something as easy as having an ounce of weed on you in certain states now. So it's ridiculous.
Absolutely. And Janet, to your point about like not being able to understand how, I guess, centrists could view this as wrong, for instance, it's my only reasoning that I can imagine is that they don't think of people in prison as human. They committed a crime, they should thereby be punished. And for these folks, it's not about rehabilitation. It's very punitive, and we don't have a rehabilitative system. We have a very punitive system. If we had a rehabilitative system, our prisons would be a lot nicer. We would have programs, education programs throughout all of the prison systems. In fact, we probably wouldn't even have the incarceration rate that we have of 2.3 million people. That's huge. Out of 300 million people all totaled, 2.3 of them are in prison. I mean, that's very telling. And per capita, we should be ashamed of ourselves again. We have the highest prison population per capita out of every single country in the world. That includes China, that includes Saudi Arabia, that includes North Korea, and all of the things and all of the places that people associate with very punitive justice system. We have the most people in prison for non-violent offenses. And we should be fucking ashamed at ourselves. So Lauren M. comments that a friend of hers spent 2 nights in jail and he had panic attacks about it for 2 months, right? So it's not about rehabilitation. And some people are spending those nights in jail for very minor things like jaywalking. I had read a case where somebody jaywalked and was immediately imprisoned and had to wait to go up in front of a judge, which is crazy because sometimes it does take days to see a judge, to hear why you're even in prison in the fucking first place. Now, I think in this instance, the judge said, this was just jaywalking, go away, basically. But they still had to wait in jail to see a judge. So we have a very punitive system. And the reason is that it is a for-profit system. And the for-profit system isn't interested in rehabilitation. In fact, they don't want rehabilitation because you stay in prison longer if you're not rehabilitated. You basically, if you do get released, you are going to come back if you're not rehabilitated, and they want your service back. It's really telling of who we are as a people when we have allowed this to happen in general. And I think that we have some responsibility to these people to help them. I recognize that there are so many different issues that we have, but one thing is to help restore the voting rights of so many people that end up getting imprisoned and don't get their voting rights back. I think, and maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure if Alabama reinstated voting rights or if it was Georgia that reinstated voting rights to prisoners once upon release. But there are some states where that does not happen if they've been convicted of a federal crime. Because the idea behind restoring voting rights is, well, you've served your time. You haven't been able to vote per the judge's orders. You were given this amount of time to say that you were then going to be released to general society and receive the full rights of being within general society. But one of those full rights that people don't want to restore is voting rights. Because if you know, as I keep saying, 60% of the prison population include Black Americans. And why wouldn't some red states want to restore the voting rights of some Black Americans? Well, because they're likely to vote non-red or not for Republican candidates. And so this is all tied to politics again. I mean, everything, this is one of them, I'm going off on a tangent here, but this is one of those things that drives me nuts when people don't want to discuss politics or don't want to think about politics. It's because every aspect of your life involves politics. It's from the air you breathe, the food you eat, to restoring fucking voting rights of people. Everything. And how you vote is also very political in nature. Like, and when you vote is very political. So everything, it boils down to our political system and politics.
Can I just say kind of scary, just put this in more math terms? I was just looking up. So there's 37 million, does that sound right? Non-Hispanic Blacks, right? Because there's 300, whatever. So if you took that and you're saying that there are 60% of the 2.3 million that are in prison, like 2.3 million of our whole population is less than 1%. It's like 0.7%. But if you do the math just on Blacks, it's like 2.3, almost 2.3, 2.5% of Black people are in prison. That's just nuts.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's about almost 3% of Black Americans are in prison. Now, mind you, that does not include the people that are still involved in the penal system, right? So those on parole and probation. It doesn't involve those. And those are an additional millions of people. And I think when I was taking my criminal justice class, the statistics was 1 in 10 Black Americans is involved in the penal system in some way. Or it may not have been Black Americans, it may have been 1 in 10 Black men are involved in the penal system in some way, shape, or fashion, whether they're currently sitting in prison, they're on parole, or on probation, which is outstanding. And I don't believe, and I think it's very terrible to be under the assumption that Black folks are just more criminally inclined. It's their brains and not our system. When our system has been systematically oppressing Black people and also systematically imprisoning them for personal gain. So back during Reconstruction, it was a great way to get railroads built was to imprison Black folks because it was free to cheap labor. And in fact, I think they assured that it was free because the way that the 18th Amendment was written, which was that was the no more slavery thing. The way it was written was saying that you could have slaves if they were imprisoned. That is still legal in the United States. And so that's why you hear a lot of people talking about slave labor regarding the prison system. And then there's the whole debate of, well, is it slave labor if they get 5 cents per hour? Yes, it fucking is slave labor because they're not doing it necessarily for themselves. And sometimes, in some cases, in some prisons, they are forced to do it, but they'll still get paid 5 cents. So it's cool. It's cool. Don't say anything about it. But it is still slave labor. And the fact that our immigration detentions currently are utilizing immigrants for slave labor as well. And they are not getting compensated. It is absolutely slave labor in their cases. Yet I don't really see anyone making a big stink over it. Not really. And it's terrible. This is a terrible injustice that we have in society. I think that we have a lot of things to fix in society, and this is definitely one of them. Because, like I said, it does speak volumes of who we are as a people group when we have allowed a particular racial group to be imprisoned, and then seemingly okay with it. This kind of, I'll read some more comments in a minute, but when I was, again, taking my criminal justice class, and the 1 in 10 Black men being involved in the penal system, there was also you hear the whole debate of, well, where are the fathers? of these like destitute mothers that somehow keep having babies in these Black communities. Where are the dads? And I'm like, involved in the penal system. Because they have been targeted for whatever reason. And again, a nonviolent offense, the majority of them. And then they get thrown in prison for years and years and years. And so the dads and the fathers are in jail for nonviolent offenses when they could be at home, like all these Christian conservative white people want, providing for their families. But no. So do you want them in prison or do you want them providing for their fucking families?
I want to just jump back before you start reading comments. I want to jump back on to Alice Johnson, and I was reading on it, and then they're like, well, Obama didn't do this. Trump gave her the clemency, but Obama didn't do it. And then they're saying, oh, well, Obama, it never made to his death. So 3 times they tried, one in his first presidency and 2 in the second term. And so I don't get how, I don't know, the centrists are just driving me nuts about everything lately, because I just don't get how they don't, someone says something bad about Obama, and then all of a sudden we're all for Trump just because he did this. The only reason Trump did this is because Trump will do anything for anyone that will kiss his ass, and Kanye is married to Kim, and Kim came and said, hey, this would look great if you do this, because she got interested in the case a while back. So like that's how I do it. He's too narcissistic not to take the praise and go, all right, well, I'm going to do this because you're my friend and all this. So I think I could go in the White House, and if I kissed his ass enough, he probably would do something for me. I should probably try that maybe.
Well, I have 2 things to say about that. My first thing regarding the Obama situation. So the Justice Department, the 3 times that it was presented to the Justice Department to get to Barack Obama, it technically did not hit his desk because the Justice Department recommended that the request for clemency be denied. And so since that recommendation went through, Barack Obama never did see it because, and the reasoning was because it was potentially, her criminal activity was potentially related to violent, could have resulted in some violence, basically, even though she's like in her fucking 60s now. I mean, people aren't working in their 60s now. Not all of them, a lot of them. And that's kind of like, they're in retirement years at this point. They're considered geriatric, right? And so what was she going to do? She didn't have her criminal links. In fact, the warden at her prison recommended that she be granted a pardon or clemency based off of her exceptional behavior while she was in prison for these 20-something odd years. And so that's why technically Barack Obama didn't see this specific case. My second point was regarding Kim Kardashian. And so it's been hypothesized if Kanye West was basically kissing Donald Trump's ass and saying like all these positive things about Donald Trump because he knew his wife was specifically going to petition the president about this instance. Because if you notice, when Kim Kardashian did come across this case and how unfair it was, and then her specifically saying, I want to take up this cause, after that was when Kanye West started going like, oh yeah, people didn't give President Trump a fair shake. He's not bad. And, I would have voted for him. Or if anything it's been hypothesized, even though I'm not really sure. I think Kanye West is a little bit too arrogant and egotistical himself to do that or to kiss anybody's ass, with maybe the exception being his wife. I don't know.
I'm thinking more like a PR move on all of their parts. Because Kanye got hit for supporting Trump. You know what I mean? So Kim was probably taking a lot of it. And then, so she probably was like, all right, well, this is a good case. We could easily win back some of this if we do that. That would just be, I mean, I just see that just only because of the way Trump acts. I don't know. Like, I mean, he just seems like if you kiss his ass, then he'd probably do anything for you. But it's like, it seems like maybe a PR move on behalf of Kanye. But
the thing about Donald Trump.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You're muted. Amanda.
So the thing about Donald Trump, or that people, am I?
No, you're back on.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing about Donald Trump that I've noticed is, or that like a lot of people have stated or said, is that one of the things that he's always been was trying to fit in, particularly with celebrities. And maybe, you know, the appeal of a celebrity like Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, you know, meeting and Kim Kardashian meeting with him instead of just talking to him over the phone, to help with this particular case was enough for him to be like, yeah, I'm part of the big kids club now. Look at me, I'm fitting in with the celebrities. And so he granted her clemency for her case. But I, you know, that's what I have read and seen about Donald Trump, is that this was reported, you know, years ago about him, as far as trying to fit in. Now, Be Proper makes a comment here, and I'm going back to your comments. Sorry. So Be Proper says slavery has been continued within the legal system, quote, legal system, due to the misconception of conservatism as a political party. And I'm going to try to understand that a little bit. So conservatism has had various waves throughout American history. One of those waves came in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. It was kind of a backlash to the Civil Rights Movement. And so you saw, you know, the emergence of the Dixiecrats during that time. And you saw the emergence of a huge conservative wave. And this continued into the 70s with the religious movement. So it was compiled into those two movements that made it kind of this religious conservatism. And it is legal in the Bible to have slaves. And so I guess what you're trying to say is that conservatives are more likely to be punitive, and this has been hashed out in many, many studies, and it usually is it's highly corresponding to religion and kind of religious belief, especially in Christianity. That's kind of the dominant belief in the United States, that it has to be punitive in nature. And since slavery is legal on the books, specifically for inmates, so it's legal to hold slaves as long as they are in prison. It seems to kind of be in the conservative conscience.
I would go as far to say that
people deserve.
Sorry, I would say that we are more into, like, I would argue that we're puritanical, really, as a country. We're not. There's still so many blue laws and crap like that on the books that is just amazing that they still can be used. And there's just that whole thing. And it drives me crazy when people go back, oh, the Constitution, and it says this, like it was never amended before. Like things have not changed in 250 years to the Constitution. And, you know, it just, I mean, the whole thing drives me nuts. The religion just drives me nuts. I'm sorry.
No, I think you're right. What I'm having difficulty in is why, you know, when you have things, okay, so maybe, and I just had this conversation with somebody earlier about this, about how conservative the United States is as a whole. Because people that are considered socialist or democratic socialists or social democrats in Europe, they're like moderates, you know. And then you have the absolute like socialist party, and then you have the communist party, and then you have like a little bit of a right wing thing going on, but we are insanely conservative to where we call, not we, I don't call them this, but I guess society does call social democrats communists, and basically disparages that. It's a term that's used disparagingly in the United States to say that you are too far out there. You are a wingnut, and you're here to corrupt and degrade our lovely system that we have in place that enslaves people, that approves of behavior and discrimination, as in the case of the Supreme Court ruling with the cake thing, which, by the way, I recognize it was more about how they handled the case versus giving them carte blanche to discriminate. However, that's not how people are viewing it. In fact, there was a lawmaker in South Dakota, I believe, that made a comment like, well, if business owners want to basically bar Black people from their establishments, they should have the right to do so. And this precedent has been set now with this cake ruling. So I think the Supreme Court did a fucked shit up, because I don't know if anybody's going to make that distinction. Anyways, but yeah, I mean, we are right wing, like in comparison to pretty much all of Western nations. We are so far out of there that people don't understand why we haven't updated our draconian laws to reflect how it should be. We shouldn't be able to enslave people just because they've committed some sort of crime. And 60% are nonviolent. So those nonviolent, it's a great slave population for the private prison industry, because then they get to also be a part of other industries, right? So now they're in the business of creating, I don't know, stop signs or something like that. And then the government will buy those stop signs. And the prisoners, not the prisoners, but the prison CEOs made a profit from their prisoners. Like, how fucked up is that? Do you think you should make a profit off of the people that you are imprisoning? That's so fucked up. That's messed up.
No one's suffering, whether it's sickness or you're in prison because of something you did, but you are paying your time in prison. No one should be making money off of you. They're ghouls if they're making money off you. It's disgusting.
And speaking of additional draconian rules, I mean, we haven't updated fucking sodomy laws that are on the books. So it's still illegal to practice sodomy in many, many, many states. I don't know how many, but I know in very southern states it is. Yet they have the right to marry, but they don't have the right to have sex like gay and lesbian couples, which, by the way, sodomy does include oral sex.
Yes, it does.
So nobody should be doing that. That's against the law. And you can be imprisoned for that. And there are cases in modern cases, like I remember there was a case like a few years ago in which somebody was giving fellatio to someone else, and they got in prison for it. And it was 2 consenting adults.
Yep.
That's fucking crazy. And they got in prison for it and convicted of a crime because of the sodomy laws that are on the books that are draconian as fuck.
I live in a dry town. I live in a town. There's still like 4 or 5 towns in Massachusetts that are dry, and I live. They just allowed like 2 or 3 years ago. There's a couple of restaurants they let you bring your own into. And then now, because we wanted the big Wegmans, we got that like 2 years ago. And then so they ended up having to give it to Roach Brothers, another grocery store that's been in the town for like 50 years. So they ended up, giving liquor license to those 2 places, and that's it now. And it's ridiculous to me that I live in a dry town. It's just crazy. I think you're muted. Amanda. She's not taking herself off mute.
Sorry, I wasn't on that page. And I was like, where's my Google Hangouts page so I can get to my thing? Anyways, what I was going to say is kind of following up with you is that there are, let's see, 44. There are about 88 counties in Tennessee that are still dry counties. Out of 90, we have 95 counties in Tennessee, and about 88 of them are dry. And then out of those that are left, there are kind of like the semi-dry counties where they don't sell liquor between a certain time frame or on the weekends or something along those lines. And so, I mean, we are just so fucked up here. And it's so, I don't understand, because that was part of the prohibition, right? The whole dry stuff. And once they legalized alcohol to help kind of assure that the black market and the mafia wasn't as powerful, it did help. But of course, we still have places in the country that are not able to sell alcohol. And that kind of gives me to another instance of drugs. I am under the belief that we should legalize and regulate, because we've got a massive problem with the drug trade. It does lead to violence. There are, gangs and cartels that profit from the drugs, the illicit substances here in the United States, whether they are profiting here or abroad. So why not legalize and regulate the drugs so that the cartels aren't as powerful or the gangs aren't as powerful, if that is really what we're all about in the United States? But no, we're more about penalizing, assuring that we have addicts so we can add their numbers to the prison population for the shareholders of the private prison industry, which is so fucked up. And that's essentially what is happening now. Do people actually make those connections? No.
But even if the taxes on what you get for selling alcohol or now selling drugs, how much would that help? How much would that help these counties? How much would that help, across the board? You could have a federal tax on stuff and state taxes. And so, why not legalize the stuff? Just regulate it, and you'd be getting money in, which could go to, hey, healthcare. Hey, that would be nice.
Absolutely. And if anything, if you're worried about people being addicted, you could use that tax revenue to fund rehabilitation centers so that anybody without consequence could go and get rehabilitated if they find themselves addicted to any of these drugs. Not to mention that it would make the drugs safer if they're regulated, because then they don't contain a mixture of components, which is in large part why people die from these drugs, because they aren't given the proper amount. They're told some amount, and it may be in excess of X amount that they're told. So they take the entire supply that they bought thinking that it was one certain amount, and instead it was, basically elephant tranquilizer amounts, and they die. So it can be regulated on that front. So the amount, the quantity, and also you can regulate the chemical components going into it, which is another reason why people die from drugs, because they think that they're taking something like MDMA, or that's ecstasy, and instead it's also mixed with heroin or some other drug. And so they take it thinking like, oh, I'm on this drug. And instead they have consumed something else that they may have never, ever taken before in their lives. And it's in a decent amount. And maybe it's not supposed to be combined in that mixture because chemistry is complicated sometimes. And they die. So it seems like it would behoove the United States as a whole if we legalized and regulated it. But that's just my take. And you know what else this would also do if you legalized and regulated drugs? You would see people like Alice Marie Johnson never go to prison and go to prison for their first ever nonviolent offense for life, because it's legal.
Mark was asking if you would agree, like cocaine and heroin. I would agree because it would be regulated. With that, Mark, I would. And then Brad Bloom was saying, oops, now I lost the comment. Sorry. Well, he was saying something about that they don't want to do this because they get the prisoners and they making money through there. So it's like, who are you gonna, it's the donors in it again. It's the donors. It comes down to the donors and where the money's coming from, and that's why we probably will never get, I mean, even marijuana itself should just be legal. I mean, that's just freaking nuts. There shouldn't be any question about that. But I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think every single drug should be legalized and regulated because people, I mean, that's kind of the thing that, there's against actually legalization of guns. People find a way anyways. Criminals find a way. So why don't you gun owners, you gung-ho NRA members, expand that thought of thinking or that line of thinking to drugs and actually regulate it that way? It's just so hypocritical and so dumb. It's dumb.
We don't do such a great job on the guns, so maybe that's where everyone's worried about it.
Right. Well, I mean, we don't do a great job on criminalizing gun use, I guess. As long as you're white. If you're black and you are a legal gun owner, you're going to get killed. I mean, but that just shows you the multifaceted, or I guess multi-tiered justice system that we have. If you're poor, you're screwed. If you're a minority, you're fucked. And there's a lot of things we could be doing about it, but we don't, because a lot of people in this country are fine with it, or they want to ignore it, or they are going to excuse it. Like, it's just who they are. They're criminals. Really? You really think that when this isn't a problem and so many other industrialized nations? That's stupid. All right. I'm ready to call it, but I'm going to see if I can read one more comment before we exit. Did I hang up? I didn't hang up, did I? Okay, because it's like doing the loading screen of death on me. So somebody had mentioned in the chat stream, let's see, Plantastic Life says, when I state my opinion that all drugs should be legalized, taxed, and regulated, people look at me like I have 3 heads.
Well, they're probably looking at us.
Plantastic Life, I wouldn't look at you like you have 3 heads. I think you're right on the money about that, because I think that it would lead to a lot of problems being solved, whether it has to do with the prison population, the expanding mass prison population that we have, or the drug cartels that I guess so many people claim to be upset about, but then don't really tie it to drugs at all for some reason. And how if we legalized it like we did during, to get rid of like the mafia during the Prohibition era, it could break up cartels and gangs. But you know what? It's fucked up. But yeah, I wouldn't look at you like that. So guys, before we call it for today, I want to thank you guys for being with us and for being a part of the conversation, and also obviously making comments for us to read and learn from, because a lot of the time I learn something new every time. So I do thank you guys for being here with us. And also I want to implore you that if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. And also, if you don't receive our Twitter notifications or any social media notifications as far as when we go live, a good way to receive notifications is to not only subscribe to our channel, but also to to select that bell, because that should notify you when we go live or upload a new video. And also, if you can, please consider donating to our Patreon page, which I hope that Janet will include in the link below after this broadcast, so that we can continue to bring you guys content and also continue doing some upgrades to our videos. And Janet, do you have any ideas as far as when we will be able to have live call-ins?
Well, we had Lauren sitting tonight, and she's going to be our call-in taker. So I think that went pretty well. And her and I can work on it next week. So probably the week after. We'll start with calls the week after. I don't think she'll have to do a lot right then, but we're just worried about if it gets busier down the line. So we wanted to have a third person. So Lauren is on our team. She's actually been on our team for a few weeks. I also wanted to, I changed my Dunkin' Donuts cup because I'm queer, but but I freaking I don't know. Anything else did we have to say? Did you
Nope, that's all for me. So again, thank you guys so much, and expect to have a live call-in feature the week after next. And we hope you will take advantage of that because we love hearing from you guys. So thanks again. Bye.
Bye. Now I can't hang up. All right, stop.